Well, congratulations. You've made it to the last session of the Rosenberg Forum. Yes, it deserves an applause for sure. So over the years, the forum's format has changed and the participants have evolved, and this has been a wonderful group of people to have all in one room for several days, and that's the purpose, right? It's as much about building networks as anything. And so I'm very certain that coming out of this, there will be new networks that we built, and that's probably the primary benefit of this ongoing institution. We've also, over the years, often had an end session that was focused on open community participation. Because we bring everybody here, we want to foster those networks, but we realize that this is really a conversation of only folks who were invited. And so we wanted to make sure we were more open to that. Because of some of the logistics for this year, if we've typically in the past been on a college campus or something, it's been a little bit easier. So we may have some open participants join in a little bit, but we wanted to keep the tradition of the open community session and instead give an opportunity here, as much as having outside participants potentially come, but also think about what participation means. And thank you, Kurt, and I believe a few other people. I'll pay you later for prepping us for this session during the last discussion, because it really was a perfect lead-in, is that we are all experts, emerging early career scholars to advanced career folks here. Many of us live and breathe water to some extent. We don't just drink it. And most people in the world aren't like that, right? They drink it for sure, but whether they live and breathe it, probably not. And so we often are asked to seek solutions. And that is a position of power, of course, but it's also a position of privilege. And as we consider who we're serving or who we're working with, we heard a lot about participatory methods, and we sort of, I guess maybe, we assume that it's happening, and then we can take and do our work, right? So we get that participatory work going, and we get the insights, and then we can go and do our work. But we, of course, know, everyone in this room, that that's not, it takes a lot more effort than that. And many of us, we've heard stories about that, but it's always underlying. All of that really difficult engagement work is underlying the wonderful presentations that we've seen. So what we thought we would do here is open that black box up a little bit, just to make sure we give it some light as part of the discussion around participatory processes. And there's a lot of terms or phrases that are sometimes in the literature that we heard that are related to this. So we heard science to policy, we heard informed research, science to society interactions, right? Well, there are lots of different methods to this about how you make sure that your research is grounded and relevant. And addressing questions that people have. And one model for that is the cooperative extension. And so we'll have, as part of our discussions today, we'll have a presentation from Associate Vice President of University of California, Brent Hales, who will talk about experiences across multiple extension programs with one particular model. And it's perhaps to get some cross-learning around that. But that would, of course, open up discussion to other opportunities to make sure that we're grounding our research in the questions that are being asked by the people and communities that we work with. And I also, before we'll embark on that session, we have one of our colleagues in CIWR, Erica Casilla-Madrazo, is a project scientist, came from Mexico, did a lot of participatory work in watersheds. And we've been building some of that in California for extension and engagement programs on watershed management. And Erica will often say, you know, people are busy, you know, they don't care or trying to get their attention. They've got their kids or, you know, other, you know, jobs going on and so forth. So how do you actually get them engaged? How do you get them excited? How do you get some energy around that? Well, a lot of it has to do with relationships, right? We often are getting information from the people that we trust or the places that we trust. So with that idea, what we'll talk about here is participatory methods, and then also foster some participation from y'all as well, which will be a great way to close it out. So we'll hear from AVP Hales, and then we'll hear from our regional fellows as well, and just some reflections on participation, making sure that we're grounded in the place where we are here. And then finally, we'll hear from each of y'all. And so myself and Andrea Gerlach and Christina Babbitt are the session chairs for this. And I invite up Brent to provide some reflections on cooperative extension.
Well, thank you very much. My title may not actually bring one to think water or water policy or engagement of any type. But I want to bring out Iman's synopsis because it provided actually I couldn't have asked for a better intro to what I'm going to be talking about. Because the role of new knowledge in the academic pursuit is driven by research. It's driven by the desire to move beyond current knowledge, ways of thinking, knowing, and doing. And it's based on the academic rigor, but it's not necessarily based on information that the public can use. It's not necessarily practical. And in reality, all of our communities, they're all based on context. They have their own histories and cultures and economies and knowledge ways of gaining status based on politics and religion. And it also is impacted by who controls the knowledge, be it traditional knowledge as well as new knowledge. And as we think about, and yesterday I made reference to power as the ability to get someone to do something, perhaps even when it's not even in their best interest. And as we've talked about the last 2 days, policies and really the power to change entire environments, it caused me to question, in fact, who controls that? Meaning, is it the golden rule? He who has the gold makes the rules? Or is it more around policies to achieve an end or simply to comply? So in the United States, we have a land grant system that was set up in 1862 by the legislature, where land was taken and given to states so that they could set up public universities. 1868, the University of California was founded, and then successive legislation came about. The Hatch Act, which enabled us to set up research experiment stations, farms, to advance new knowledge around agriculture. The Smith-Lever Act of 1914 created the cooperative extension system, and it's designed to extend the knowledge from the university out into the populace, extend the knowledge out into ways that the common person can understand and hopefully utilize. And then we had later research around forests, or legislation around forests. So my role is one that works in community context, in engagement. And, excuse me, I'm not sure why it moved ahead. The sustainable development has to be done in that context because it's based on what is common, what is based on that history and the identity. And there's a difference in development to or for versus from and with. And the most sustainable policies, the most sustainable practices are done with communities, done with individuals versus to or for them. Because it's the sustainability of initiatives that happens in that very context. So I'm borrowing a physics term. We heard a lot about homeostasis. We heard a lot about communities or ecosystems trucking along and something happens. Well, this is, University of California is actually my 5th land grant that I've worked with. So I've worked in Iowa, I've worked in Mississippi. I worked in Mississippi for 12 years in the Mississippi Delta region. Then went to Minnesota at the headwaters of the Mississippi, and then Pennsylvania and now California. And I lived in Mississippi in 2005, when Hurricane Katrina came through, Category 5 hurricane, and 2 weeks later, right behind it was Hurricane Rita. And the region of the Mississippi Delta is impacted by these storms in large part because of the loss of wetlands to the tune of they're losing a soccer pitch, a football field every 100 minutes, which comes to about 152,000 square meters a day. So there, in that context, there was a lack of political will to make substantive changes to change the context. There's not a political will to repair the wetlands in any substantive way. And so as a result, what's likely to continue is this point of bifurcation where at that point there, whether it's a storm, whether it's a dam or whatever it is, communities or societies can evolve and go up and reestablish homeostasis or continue on a downward trajectory. And as we've heard examples about the lack of adaptation, we're seeing choices that are being made around points of bifurcation. So the role of civic engagement, it brings together stakeholders specifically to capitalize on that local context, local and indigenous knowledge. And it engages local decision-making and is really designed to build the capacity of people to meet their own needs. And so when we think about civic engagement, how it's used, and I apologize for this, to bring people together, to ask hard questions, to analyze, synthesize, and make plans that are completely based on that knowledge building, sharing, and development. So here's a map of the United States. I thought this might be helpful, particularly as it relates to, you can see Minnesota right up at the top there. And that river, that delta starts, the impact of that starts way up there in Minnesota because as we know, as water goes down, it has impacts. So I'm going to talk to you just briefly about 2 different states where political will was there. So I was most recently, before coming to California, at Penn State University. And at Penn State, they have a program called the Master Watershed Stewards Program, and it's a citizen science program. It takes people, trains them, volunteers. The volunteers actually pay to get this training, and then they go out and they work with the community because sometimes that new knowledge or that new policy requires people to adapt, and they may not have the capacity or the ability to make that change on their own or make those required changes on their own. And so there are about 1,000 master watershed stewards in Pennsylvania. When I started in Pennsylvania, there was less than half of that. There was about 300. It tells you about the growth of the program. I started there in 2019, so dramatic growth. The challenge was the Chesapeake watershed, or the Chesapeake Bay, was the productivity had crashed because of pollution. And about in the 1980s, there was a realization something had to change. This point of bifurcation came together as the states came together and said something has to change. But the reality is that over 50% of the water flow feeding into the bay comes from Pennsylvania. And as you can see in this picture, that's not uncommon, unfortunately, as you look to how the runoff and the discharge happens. In 2022, the Environmental Protection Agency of the United States said, you're not doing enough. You're not meeting those goals. And so as a result, they sued the states, and the state realized it was actually much cheaper to invest in these citizen science people, the volunteers who actually were making a difference. And so that was the result of the dramatic growth of the program. So these are some of the strategies that they include, including working with landowners to build in riparian buffers, improving streams, creeks, and river banks, replanting species, data collection, and building plans to actually improve the health of the watershed. And this wasn't being done to or for the landowners, it was being done with the landowners. And so you can see on that picture, the far picture, one of the extension educators actually working with the volunteers to do habitat restoration. And also training, letting people know what happens when they dump in the sewers. So the Master Watershed Steward continues to grow, continues to develop programs. There's a designation that communities can receive, the Watershed Friendly PA designation, and they continue to document with actual quantitative, qualitative statistics using this citizen science the greater compliance with the Chesapeake Bay Water Agreement. In Minnesota, very similar, the Leadership and Civic Engagement Program at the University of Minnesota brings together leaders and trains them how to use the tools of civic engagement, how to work with entities, governments, peoples, communities. And they teach leaders how to build those stronger connections with communities. So in 2016, the Minnesota legislature, as you can see, there was a lot of runoff problems, a lot of drainage problems. And so they required all landowners to set a 16.5-foot or roughly 5.5 meter buffer zone, riparian buffer zone to protect the waterways. And this includes even ditches. And so what happened was a lot of the landowners, they were willing to comply, but they just didn't know how. And so the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, rather than working with landowners, began just fining them. You're not in compliance, you're not in compliance, you're not in compliance. And people were growing angry and frustrated. And so they turned to the University of Minnesota Leadership and Civic Engagement Program and said, help us figure out how to do this better. And so through training and working with the community leaders, working with nonprofit groups, working with landowners, they developed strategies to actually facilitate rounds of community discussion and teaching people using that context to come into compliance. And what they found is that people were more than willing, generally, to comply if they had a strategy to do so, and there were grant monies to actually assist in the provision and putting in these riparian buffer strips. And you can see some of these, and they're just beautiful. And it's created much better, healthier waterways and overall quality of life. So MPCA, the Pollution Control Agency, self-reported that these strategies increase compliance, also increase the viability of the waterways, and also increase the ability to actually make meaningful change in communities as well. They were no longer seen as the bad guys coming in to beat people into compliance. So, quickly, by utilizing community engagement strategies, it enables us to actually find out what is driving change, or lack thereof. It brings people together, and it brings effective community engagement, brings in the government. It brings in the businesses and the civic organizations, the educational institutions, the institutions of government, the institutions in society, to figure out solutions that work in that context. We've heard a lot about challenges associated with streams, with runoff, with dams, with if these challenges aren't tackled in context with the people that it's impacting, it's not going to be sustainable. The expected outcomes, the changes, are not going to be as effective as they could be by utilizing these tactics, these strategies, and these techniques. It's not a panacea. Let me just say that. It's not going to fix everything, but it reduces some of the main barriers to compliance to policies. It increases the viability and the likelihood that communities will work with regulators, communities will work with those interested in making meaningful change, because in essence, it comes down to their being able to and to being able to utilize that new knowledge. That then translates into potential for broader community, broader economic development, and broader sustainability. So thank you very much.
Well, thanks, Brent. And we want to give a few minutes in case there are any questions, or we could even go so far as a few comments or other experiences regarding extension engagement. Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation. So one thing that I wonder about is community engagement to what end? So these are really successful examples, but I'm wondering if you see that community engagement as a first step in building something that's more institutional. And this is coming from, when I think about, do I want to be doing something like that? I don't want to be spending my weekends doing something like that. I want to be out recreating, or just kind of thinking about the long-term sustainability of having citizens play such a huge role.
That's very, very helpful. I will tell you that in any community initiative, there are those that are really good at starting, sustaining, and stopping projects. And you need to have all three. So you may not be the right person to sustain an initiative, but with the knowledge you bring to a community, you may be able to provide them the assistance, the knowledge, and the training to get them going in the right direction. And that's why it's important to have those local community actors, the community members, engaged in the process, because as an academic, I come in, I provide them technical assistance, I provide them training, and then I pull out. The difference in sustainability means that if we've provided them with a capacity to actually go beyond what this one-time initiative may be, it enables us to actually then perhaps even move the needle further than that one project could ever be. There's a whole rippling mapping of you do one project and does it have unintended ripples, unintended actions, and so unintended consequences, positive or negative. Do you want to spend every night doing that? No, probably not. But is it possible to actually work with an entity or someone with expertise, a community engagement, a community foundation, community group to actually do that? Yeah, they're the sustainers.
Okay, I see Iman, and then Glenda, and Andrew, did you want to respond
Can I just follow up on that, because it's just perfect after
Okay, sure.
Gina's. I had a great advisor in graduate school who always taught me how to ask the question of who's getting the benefits and the burdens, and it really just follows up from Gina. I mean, I always thought the problems in the Chesapeake Bay was nitrogen, and it was from fertilizers, and it was from ag, and so I love to see community engagement, and I love to see neighbors out there, but are we kind of distracting or changing the conversation a little bit and not necessarily holding people accountable who are the source of the pollution and also getting the great economic benefits from it?
Yeah, so to your point, actually, the Master Watershed Steward Program actually works with the landowners. They work with the farmers to create the buffer strips because, quite honestly, they are, a lot of them don't have the technical expertise to be actually able to create that or do stream reparation and to limit the impact of damaging practices. As a result of this program and other similar efforts, Pennsylvania has actually become the #1 state for usage of buffer strips and cover crops because of the engagement of citizen scientists, because of the local champions, and they really are changing not just for the growers, but what happens to the hard surfaces, the roads and the parking lots when there's flash floods or when there's heavy rains and it washes all the pollution down. Well, with the utilization of buffer strips, they're able to actually capture much more of that and increase the viability of those waterways themselves.
Iman.
Thank you very much. Brent, thank you very much for this enlightening presentation. I like it very much. I think I'd like just to echo what you are saying. Citizen science is not, well, not only viable and sustainable, it is also cheaper when it comes to producing the information and knowledge, or at least you want to make things quickly available, I would say. Yes, it might take a little bit while for training, but of course, definitely, as you mentioned, you need the champions, you need the stars to start with, and therefore followers will come. And I'm sure in your experience, and of course it's also in ours, we utilize some like community, like not only leaders, but also like young people who are maybe university students or like others who are interested in a better, let's say, situation, and who is willing really to contribute their time in order to produce this type of knowledge and information, and even doing some monitoring with little kind of training, and provide the information that otherwise the state or the government would invest a lot of money in order to get the same type of information. So this is something that I would say is really very important to invest in and to generalize in terms of like how we can make it more sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I couldn't agree more. I will tell you that cooperative extension actually uses the citizen science model in a number of our programs across. We have 16 now statewide programs and institutes at the University of California, and a lot of them actually utilize the citizen science model specifically because it is cheaper, and people, when they have a passion for something, they're willing to do the work to actually enable the science to be collected and demonstrate meaningful change.
Glenda, I believe you were next.
Yeah, just a couple points. I think the really key thing here might get back to a slide that was up, I don't know, 2 or 3 hours ago. The presentations are all blurring a little bit. But about short-term versus long-term, how we interact with stuff. Because I think one of the reasons I'm such a passionate fan of cooperative extension, or something like it, that's what we just happen to call it in the US, is that having these scientists embedded out in the field at all times, or at least frequently, depends on how the state is administering it, really makes a difference in having an infrastructure to deal with whatever Mother Nature throws at you. If you've got people out there that have been there for 5 or 10 years, and when we put our scientists out there, we require them to do a needs assessment. So right off the bat, their first 6 months, they aren't telling anybody anything. They're asking the community, what are your issues? What's the reality? What's going on? And how do we look at potential solutions? So I think there's that long-term, having those people there as infrastructure that's critically important, and particularly if you are going to pursue community science. I think community-based participatory science really only functions well if you do have some actual scientists as part of the overall effort too. If for nothing else, quality control. And what we have found in our experience is that where we have 18,000 volunteers, just California. Now again, every state in the US has some version of this. Everyone's managed a little differently, which is kind of interesting because then you've got 50 little Petri dishes to look at on how people manage them, and you can adapt your own. But the people in our programs that have went through training, like our master gardeners, our master naturalists, are easily the best citizen scientists because they've had training and they've got certifications. The others that are really good, and this kind of drives people crazy, but amongst our volunteers, is actually our 4-H kids, at least the ones in high school and junior high. They're actually better than the adults quite often. They take direction and they actually do what they're told a little better than some of the adult volunteers. But what we use them for is not to be scientists in their own, but to leverage our scientists to get so much more work and data collection and whatever else. So I think it's important to see the different ways you can start using these as tools in whatever effort you're doing.
I think next up front, Lou.
Thank you. I interesting about community engagement Yeah, it is very happy to be here and listening about all of you discussion about the community engagement, participatory approach. That is what we hope presented in the community, because the previous time is the limitation of participation from the local community. Participation here is not only the number of person, but we focus on the empower community, respect the local knowledge, respect the decision making from the local community. For me, I have experience regarding the community engagement because I work directly with them, and we have. Yeah, you mentioned about the sustainability. Sustainability, for me, it is not about the money. Self-financing, not about the money, but it about the system, about the management capacity that they have, they can manage by themselves. Yeah. Easy for them to operate, to manage, and transparency for the member in the community. That is the sustainability. And at the Central Province, the place that I working there, I have a successful indicator about the self-financing, because we apply multiple approach to support the community fishery along the Mekong River. Currently, we have support certified community fishery. They have their own money. They can manage their implementation management plan to conserve the fisheries along the Mekong River. Yeah, each community, they have money around 10K to 15K for their own. And yeah, they have system, they have structure to manage. It's easy, that system, that transparency for all members and involve all stakeholders and local authority to monitor the success. And yeah, that is not a difficulty for us when we talk about the community engagement. It is related to the trust, build trust, ownership for them, and transparency. Yeah.
Couldn't agree more. When I teach, when I was a professor of community and economic development, and I taught exactly what you're talking about, in order for my students to think about perhaps a way to capture it all, I came up with the acronym of PRAISE, so that our efforts are proactive versus being reactive. They're representative, meaning all of the models and the strategies and the tactics and the techniques that they've learned, they're not just relying on one. It's asset-based, meaning we're not looking to the outside for the answers or for the resources to make it happen necessarily, but making actual use of what we have, and that requires to actually figure out what that is using a mapping. It's inclusive in terms of the people, the government, the business, civic organizations, old, young, people from different backgrounds. It's sustainable. We're not leveraging the future to solve today's problems. And it's equitable, meaning the cost and the benefits are spread across all within the community. And so I love what you said. Thank you.
I think we have
Thanks.
Natalia. Go ahead.
Thanks for your talk. My view is that co-production of knowledge is more effective and leads to more power transformations, what it involves not only data gathering or the use of data science, citizen science apps, but also involves the community from the idea, the need of the solution, and the co-production of the solution. So I like what you told us, that the community went to the university to ask for the solutions, and I wanted more details on how your institution works as an open doors institution.
Yeah, and as Glenda mentioned, our folks are actually
volunteers.
built, and they live in the communities that they serve. So there's a great amount of trust. We don't have to go in and, because we're not actually going into the communities, we're already there. Our people are placed in the communities, doing research, doing programs, engaged on a daily basis.
And the folks from the campuses utilize our folks that are embedded in the communities to help expedite their attempts at research.
Which then turns right back around and funnels the research. And so it closes that model, closes that loop. So, yes.
We have Jennifer, and then we have Yoon, and then we will move on to the second session.
Yeah, no, this is fantastic, and thank you so much. I mean, this is at the heart of everything we do. I'm just trying to bring it into the context of also, you know, from the United States to some of the more challenging countries where we work. And sometimes you have a lot of this engagement and participation, and communities get super frustrated afterwards because they have all these things they want and they're not able to deliver. So one is like not just on the scientific research, but of course they want other things to meet their needs. I'm just wondering, does that ever happen, and how do you manage that in the United States when that happens, when the demands are bigger than the supply, to put it that way?
Yeah, so
Both
doing
demand
work in the
and supply.
Mississippi Delta was probably the most frustrating time in my entire life, to the point that I had to tell my graduate students the hardest thing you have to do as an academic, as an expert, is allow the communities to make decisions that you know are not going to get them to where perhaps they could be. To allow them to choose to fail in those efforts. Because they're not sustainable, they're not equitable, they're not representative, they're not based in the best of the community, because again, sometimes that power dynamic raises its head. And so this isn't a cure-all. This is a tool, this is a strategy, this is a tactic to increase the capacity, increase the likelihood of success. But I'll tell you, I did community-based initiatives with 2 communities 4 miles apart. One, the impacts are still happening today, and that was in 2004. And the benefits are still happening today. The other one, they painted their curbs and garbage cans.
Okay, great. I think, you as in California system, have so many extension scientists here, and you guys definitely, I think, probably the best in the world in doing this. But as academic, we write papers and we go through those peer review process to make sure, okay, this is solid science, and because of the review system. But for those kind of engagement, how do we ensure it's really a good practice? Or you and have something similar to a peer review system. Say, okay, this is a solid kind of practice. How do you ensure that?
Yeah, we build in rigorous evaluation into every single program, every single initiative. It's built in, baked in, and our scientists, as well as the leaders of our programs, are required as part of their scholarship to demonstrate return on investment, to demonstrate that they're actually making a difference, that it's working. Now, I will tell you, the best learnings I've ever had were from failure, both as an academic, as a student, and as a practitioner. And so please don't think I'm saying that this doesn't result in failure. It's science. That's what happens. And guess what? People are involved, so it gets really messy. And so the best thing that we can do is build in evaluation on the front end, evaluate it along the way to make sure that we have key performance indicators, to make sure that we are doing what we said we're going to do, and these are the impacts, and then take that evaluation and put it back at the front, at the start of the program. So it's this continuous cycle of planning, implementation, evaluation, which leads into planning, and that's how it happens. What's that? Adaptive management, yes.
We always need new terms. Well, let's give a round of applause to Brent and to everybody, please.